Thank you for attending the Integrated Point of Sale Aloha Workshop Series on Aloha Basics. This individual webinar is one of 3 parts that constitute a basic education necessary for all owners and managers to begin using and maintaining their Aloha system on a day-to-day basis. In this portion, we will be taking a look at the basic daily reports, how to configure them, and how to read them, as well as typical examples of information you should be looking for. Let's take a look at the 4 basic reports you run on a daily basis in Aloha. These are the standard reports usually used to give you an idea of where your business is going and how previous days have transpired. Starting first, we'll look at the Sales Summary Report. To get to this report, go to Menu, Aloha Point of Sale, Sales, Sales, Summary Report. There is a weekly report located directly below that, but we can achieve the same by going here and choosing a range of dates. After you choose a report setting, you'll be greeted with a pop-up similar to this one for all of the reports that we're going to look at today. You can either choose the date that you would like to run the report for, or you can choose a range of dates by clicking on the first and the last, and Aloha will fill in the intermediate days. Next, we're going to take a look at the Settings button. Pressing Settings opens up a list of behaviors that we can have included within our daily sales report. Everything that is in the left column here marked available are the items that are available to be included in our report, but do not necessarily have to be included in our report. Everything in the right column are the elements that we've already asked to be included in our sales report. You can see that sales is listed here twice. The reason is because we can include different modifiers to that sales and change the label on it. So here, by including these items, comps, promos, and taxes, I've relabeled this one as gross sales. If you look at the second one, we're not including those, and so we'll refer to that as net sales. Various items throughout the report can be reorganized by moving them up or down, and can also be labeled as to what they include, or making any choices relevant to how that item is going to be included, whether we want to see it with subtotals or all lumped together and so forth. To add or remove an element from the report, simply select on the side that you want to move it from and click the arrow to move it in the direction you would like to. If I click the right arrow, it'll make this item included in my report at the bottom, and then I can move it up or down to put it where I like. You can include elements multiple times on the same paper. That way you could have a sales summary or what your expected deposit is listed on the first page, but again at the back when you're looking at it to see it with an over short. Or if you would like to see your summary by day part, you could put that on every page of the sales report. Usually you'll remove any elements, such as by clicking on the left here, that you do not need to have included in the sales report so as to make it as concise as you can for an ease of viewing. Typically, when you review your sales report, you're looking to look at sales numbers, as well as your deposits and over shorts, how many guests you've had in a different day period, how many sales you've had within each sales category, such as food, liquor, and so forth, and some of these are configurable to greater degrees than others. Once I have the settings where I would like them, I can go ahead and click Save, and after choosing my date, I'll be able to view and see the report set up the way that I have just laid it out. The first time that you run the sales report for a given date, you'll get a pop-up indicator asking you if you would like to include a deposit. This would be for if at the end of the day you had calculated how much cash was on hand and was being taken to the bank, you could go ahead and include that item right now, and it would be included as an element within the report. I'm going to hit Add, and I'm going to pick the amount of $850 that we are taking to the bank. For the description, I'm going to use what would be the number on the deposit slip or the carbon that I'm going to save, so that I have an easy way to tie back the over and short for that day to the sales report. If, for instance, the bank were to call and say that I had miscalculated by $90 because I included a 10 in with the hundreds and so forth. I'm going to hit OK, and we now know that Aloha thinks I'm taking $850 as my deposit for the day, not including the cash I started with at the beginning of the day. If I hit Close, it will now calculate the sales report, and we can take a look at the information contained. The items that appear on the report are now listed in the order that we chose them. Down at the bottom, we have a double arrow, which will take us to the first page of the report. The single arrow takes us up one page further in the report, or the double arrow will take us to the last page of the report. Printing will go ahead and open up your standard print dialog so you can make a copy of the report. And you also have the ability to print an individual page if you would like to. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and talk about just a few items found on the sales report. Things that would be noticeable would be to keep an eye out for large amounts of voids, indicating that either A, you have a training issue that needs to be addressed, or B, somebody has been deleting items after they ring them in and perhaps has a permission to do something they should not be able to access. If we scroll down a little bit further, we can see here that we have our parts of the day, and I'm going to go ahead and progress to the second page. On the second page of our reports, we have our sales by category, and we have it broken down to show our taxes and day parts here for food, beer, wine, and liquor. Down here is the employee over short, which should naturally be 0. All the payments that we have received. And then on the third page, you can see we have additional categories here for our comps that we have set up. Comps are something that you can go ahead and individually track as detailed or as vague as you would like. It's a lot easier to combine the accounts together, such as difficulty with staff being represented by categories saying difficulty in the kitchen, difficulty in the dining room, or difficulty at the bar, and then combining them all together. Once the reports have already been run and we've only categorized it as difficulty with staff, it's much harder later to go and narrow down which portion of the restaurant may be the problem with that. Gift certificates sold, revenue categories, credit card tips are all basically straightforward. The last thing we want to look at here at the bottom, however, is our calculated deposit and our declared deposit. You can see that on this given day in business, most of our sales were received in credit cards. Therefore, our calculated deposit is $162. Now, as we saw, I entered in $850. Therefore, according to the report, we are $687 over in our deposit. This would definitely be something we would want to follow up on. Generally speaking, you should be able to acquire with a little bit of diligence and a little bit of supervising of your staff, an over short of 0 on a normal basis. Anything outside of that range usually indicates human error, with the general standard being $5 over or short on a bartender as an indicator of something worth tracking. This would apply to cashiers as well. Returning to our settings bar, we have the ability to create custom reports or additional copies of the report. This way, we can create an additional one that appears in the pull down here that has different settings, so we can go back and forth between reports with different fields and different settings depending on the function. In this example, let's create one that we want to use for a bookkeeper who comes in and does our payroll. We can call this report our bookkeeper report, and we can start by copying the settings that we're using in the default. If we do that, it will generate a new report with the same settings here, only someone who is coming in to do our bookkeeping may not be concerned with the individual amounts of sales that we did by day part. So if we took the day part portions out, we're going to get a shorter report that indicates the things just of interest to the person who is running our payroll or our sales reports. We can go ahead and save this one, and now when we look to the outside settings, we have an additional pull down where we can go back and forth between the default report that we're running daily, as well as a separate report for our bookkeeper with different fields. And lastly, under sales reporting, we have the ability to change our deposit. By clicking on Change Deposit, we're granted with the same field where we've already entered in sales data. We can add a new deposit, remove the deposit, or edit the amount of the deposits we've already taken to the bank if we were to find out that there was an error. After we close out of the sales reports, we also have the ability under Functions to go directly to edit our deposits. This takes us to the same field, and it's just a quicker version of editing the field without having to go into the report settings to do so. Now let's take a look at a basic labor report. If we choose Reports, Aloha Point of Sale, Employees, Labor, we get a basic report with a pop-up setting that looks like this. Here we have the ability once again to choose the date that we want to run the report for, as well as a column to choose which employee we would like to run the report for. Typically, you'll select all employees to get a review of how the employee labor looked for a given day or a given pay period. If we were to choose to do it for, like say, for instance, 7 or 14 days and only choose one employee, the resulting report would in fact be their time card for that period. We also have the ability, when viewing multiple employees at the same time, to print the reports with 1 page per employee so that it could be included, for instance, with their paycheck. Again, you can see that we have the ability to establish multiple default settings for various versions of the reports. so that we could have one to review the previous day's labor, making sure that everyone clocked out correctly or was punched in under the correct job code, or we could choose to have a second one set up to show us our payroll reporting for the end of the period. We could also use various modern versions of this for things like forecasting and evaluating labor dollars per department that we would like to spend. If I go under settings, you can see we have quite a few different fields we can do. We can label at the top which report this is to be, whether it's going to be our daily or our weekly report or a payroll report, and then many fields to choose from here, indicating which information we're most interested in looking at on this given report. We can often remotely help you with sales reporting and payment reporting, as well as product mix and so forth, but the one report we have a difficult time helping you with is labor reporting on a day-to-day basis. Since we are helping you remotely with your system, we have no real way of knowing whether everybody was clocked in correctly on a previous day or clocked out at the right time. So this is one that we currently encourage you to review daily for both accuracy and for any suspicious changes edited by another manager or anyone who has got access to a manager's code. If you review this daily, you'll find that you have very little to review when it comes time to run your report for payroll. If you unselect detail lines, you can see that we lose the ability to choose things here, such as whether it was edited or what the date of business was and the time in and out. Since most of the time those are the things we'll want to review on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to go ahead and leave detailed lines selected, and then we'll go ahead and choose the time in and time out. We can sort the report by job code, employee name or employee number, or several other ways that we can take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and save these settings this way, and we're going to go ahead and print one out and review it. So if we look at the report here, you can see that I now have a list that would show each individual employee, what their name was, what position they were working, the time they clocked in, the time they clocked out, and then we have various combinations showing their total hours, overtime, and pay, and so forth. If every employee had a pay rate indicated in the system, you could see we would be able to know what their total pay was for that period. And also we can see what their declared tippable sales were so that we could tax it appropriately on their payroll. At the end of the report, if I hit the double arrow and skip down to the last page of the labor report, we have a category that's going to go ahead and show us what the employees individually did for their total hours, as well as you saw in the last one, sorted by job codes or any other summary section we would like to include. Looking again at the total indicators up at the top, we have an indicator here on the time out. One of the things that we would be looking for here as a suspicious thing would be to make sure A, any individual employee is both clocked in under the correct job code, that the number of total hours they worked is a sensible amount of hours. If you see a long shift, such as 13 hours, does that mean that the employee forgot to clock out? Or they actually did work that long, in which case we may need to look at our scheduling a little closer. A clock out time of, say, 4 a.m. usually indicates that the employee did not in fact clock out and was clocked out automatically by the system when it ran end of day. Those are also shifts that we would want to follow up on immediately and make sure that we can adjust the time before it gets too far out and nobody remembers what time the employee actually left, or for that matter, what position they were actually working that evening. If everything looks correct in the daily labor report, you can go ahead and print it out to save a copy for your audit, and you should be good to go. In addition to using the report for a daily audit, we could choose a range of dates if we wanted to look at a time period for payroll, or we can also use this for forecasting. If we were to choose a range of dates, and in our settings instead look at a summary section just by job code, we can go ahead and run a report that will show us by department essentially what our total labor expenditures are. The summary section at the bottom of this report will now show us how many dollars for a given period we spent in hours and pay for any given job department. Using this as a guide going forward, we can see that in order to decrease our labor expenditures, we need to remain in proportional increase or decrease with our sales to this labor number. So if I were going to plan on a softer week for sales next week, I would want to make sure that my number used for my labor and servers would be lower than the number that I expended this week. Going from an initial installation, you'll often be using these information looking day over day, and then week over week, month over month, until you've got a year's of history. Once you have a year's of history, you'll use the same day over the previous year. That way we could say, for instance, on the week of St. Patrick's Day, what our sales were last year may be a determinant on how much labor we want to schedule for our sales over St. Patrick's Day this year. Always make sure when looking back at previous years to adjust for changes in the calendar, because sometimes the holidays may not fall on the same portion of the week or the same week at all. The last basics report that we'll run for daily use will be the payments report. This is located under Aloha Point of Sale, Payments. This report has very little in the way of configuration. Essentially, it's just a record of the payments received, and it's not allowing you to hide any sales. What we would do is choose this date here again, and then view the report. There's quite a bit that's worth looking at in the payment detail report, as it's a record of everything that was received on the income side during the previous date of sales. If we make this a little bit bigger so that we can look at it, you see we have a record of all of the individual checks that we've received. This is the individual check number located in the top right corner of the check presented to the guest. After we go through the report, it then begins listing our individual credit card transactions, the amount of tips that were received on those transactions, fading into a summary of the gift cards that were received, and the credit cards that were received. This amount should be the same as the amount that you receive from your credit card batch, assuming, of course, that you settled the batch for 1 day's sales and that you also ran the report for the same time. After that, we have an individualized list of all the comps that transpired. So here as we go down, we can see that on check 30038 at 8:57, this employee meal was comped by a manager. On this employee, the amount of the comp, what comp they chose, if there was any reason that needed to be typed in or chosen as well, that would be done as well, and then what the employee had. All of these are individually broken down so that we can take a look at them and audit them and see that everything is being comped both correctly and by the proper people. You have a record of who has authorized every individual comp within your establishment, as well as why it was done. At the end is a summary of the comps that were done, and then a list of any promotions that were done. Comps in Aloha are anything that was made and we did not receive full value for. Promos are a subset of comps that indicates that not only did we receive less than full value for the item, but we planned to receive less than full value for the item. Since we plan to receive less than the full amount of the item, we can set up conditions in the system to make sure that that promo is only applied when it is entitled to, such as a coupon for a free dessert being able to only be applied to desserts. They can also auto-apply if you entitled your staff to go ahead and put those on with a minimum of effort from your management. These are something that you would want to review on a near daily basis to make sure that all of the payments are being handled properly, as this is part of your official record. Usually, the sales summary report, the labor report, and the payment detail report are the daily reports done after credit cards have been settled. Those 3 reports are often printed off, put in a manila envelope with the date of business on them, and also in that envelope is put all of the credit card statements for the day, any collected gift certificates and coupons or any other items that you've decided to have your staff track, and the date is put on the outside of the envelope where it's filed away for future reference. Often they are put in a box in the office, and at the end of the month, that box is then filed away for reference in case you need it for audit or your accountant would like to take a look at it. Once we've done those 3 reports, the last daily report we would do is the product mix. The product mix is not actually done necessarily daily, but can be to quite great effect within the restaurant. The product mix report is simply a record of everything that was sold in the establishment, and we can go ahead and sort it by how it was sold. The default is that it will show you every item included in a sales and retail categories, and we would go ahead and sort that to group them by category. If we do that and run our sales report for a given range of dates, we get a report that shows us which items were our most sold and which items were potentially our most profitable items. A look at the items that are up for sale in this report shows that under the category that we are tracking, so sorted first by food and then eventually going into liquor, we have the item number, what the item was, how many of it were being sold, the average price that they were sold at, the total amount of revenue from that item, as well as you can see what the profit was on that item. And if we had entered in the food cost, you could see what the food cost was for that item, as well as its sales percentage. This item will actually give you if the cost is included in your system if you have entered it yourself. This will give you a better indication for what your food cost should be in your establishment based off of the product mix that you are selling. If, for instance, you were selling a burger with a 30% food cost, but it only allowed you to take home $2, or a steak with a 50% food cost, but allowed you to take home $10, even though your total food cost would be close to 50% if you sold nothing but steaks, it would allow you more dollars to take home at the end of the day. You would never be able to hold your staff accountable for reaching a 33% food cost, because they're only selling items with a 50% food cost. Running the product mix report can give you valuable insight for how your restaurant runs on a day-to-day basis, as well as what are realistic and attainable goals based on your own individual sales. Additionally, under the settings, we can use this to track non-sales categories. This would be things like employee meals, or burgers, or any other category that we have declared. The categories, once we have set them up, can be used to track everything from frozen products purchased from a vendor, so as you can go negotiate to get a better rebate, or items that you perceive as having a high likelihood of theft. We could do this for daily meat counts to keep track of steaks, for instance, and then compare that against how many are on hand to see if any are missing. Taking a look at our desktop, you saw that we had the Aloha Manager, and we also had a program called Aloha EDC. These are in fact both parts of Aloha, but you sign in them to go directly to the portion. EDC stands for Electronic Draft Control, and that is the portion that handles your credit card processing. You sign into it with your regular Aloha sign-in, but once you enter it, you have this interface. Shutting credit card processing off does not stop credit card processing, but instead keeps it from authorizing those credit cards, and just allows you to generate a temporary authorization, such as you would do if there was an interruption in your credit card service or an interruption in your internet service. This is only a short-term process and is not designed to be left on. Under here, in order to settle your credit card batch daily, we would go under Functions, Settle Batch, and then hit Select All and authorize the credit card batches to be settled. Since I have no unprocessed credit cards in my system, this field right here is blank. And if your system has already been settled, this is what you should see at the beginning of your day. It's important that you not settle your credit card batches during a date of business, because if a credit card has already been processed and you settle the batch of credit cards, you will no longer be able to further edit it, such as adding a tip to it for your staff. Only process your credit cards at the end of the day after all of your staff is done entering in all of their tips, usually at the end of the day after everyone has left. Additionally, it's common for credit card processing to be done the following morning before the start of the new day. However, if you forget and business has started, people are taking payments, you might want to wait until the next day and go ahead and settle both days' batches together so as not to put your staff in a position where they are unable to edit tips. Returning to Aloha, there are several other reports we can take a look at. Occasionally, you may have need to use the reprints. This would be if a customer came to you and said that they needed a copy of a check from a previous day in order to declare a business expense. You can also reprint server checkouts from previous days. In both of these instances, if we needed to reprint something from the current date of business, we would take care of that in the front of the house. But after the computer is run end of day, this information is accessible in the back of the house. To do so, we go to Reports, Aloha Point of Sale, and Reprints. Typically, when I'm using Aloha Reprint, I first make sure that my output is to the screen so that I can take a look and make sure the information is correct before I were to print it. If I go up here under Settings, I can change my output to the screen rather than sending it directly to the printer. We have the ability to reprint both guest checks and checkouts. To reprint a guest check, we simply hit Guest Check, choose the date of business, and then we are given some sorting options since there's a relatively large number of checks available on any given business day. When we reprint checks using this method, they will instead print to our office printer, and even though they will look identical to the check that was printed in the front of the house on the previous date of business, they will instead print out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper when we print them. Normally this suffices for most people's concerns. Here you see we can sort by the employee name, check numbers, the time they were in, or possibly the amount or how they paid. Usually the combination of these things will allow us to narrow it down when and where the customer was so that we can go ahead and reprint their check. Once we find the check that we would like to reprint, all we have to do is select it and then hit reprint. We get to view a version of that before we actually print the check out to make sure that we are looking at the correct check, and from there on out we can print it and give it to the person. Lastly, I want to touch on a tool that you'll very rarely use other than to know it's there and available for you should you have need of it. Audits are located under Point of Sale, Audits. What these allow you to do is see a volume of transactions and almost every keystroke recorded in the front of the house. Since there's such a large amount of activity taking place in the system in a given day, you normally wouldn't run this report to look just through and see what your staff had been up to. You could easily be overwhelmed by the amount of information in the audit. However, it does give us an opportunity to look for specific behavior, especially if we already had reason to suspect something. If we wanted to see a given employee and what they had been up to, we can choose a range of times that we would like to look at for that employee, and then we can go in and see what activities they had done by selecting the activity we would like to keep an eye on. If I'd like to see if they had been reopening checks, or if they were up to doing comps, I could go ahead and take a look at any given items that they selected. And when I go ahead and do the report, I'll get the opportunity to see every time that that employee performed that activity throughout the date that was chosen. As I said, this report can be extremely long, so it's best only used when you have something specific in mind that you would like to take a look at. As you can see here, I did it for one employee, and it's 3 pages just for a couple bits of activity that they performed. But it does allow me now to see what time and what action they took, what table it was applied to, and who they did it with. All of those activities may be helpful in nailing down unusual behavior, or specifically to find out if there's an instance of someone misbehaving. Whether intentional or not, it may just be an opportunity to perform some additional training. That concludes the basic report functionalities that you'll use. As you saw when I flipped through the reports menus, there are quite a few other functions, including things like tracking performance measures, sales and labor reports, forecasting for overtime, reporting tip income, and many other functions. Once you're familiar with the basic reporting functionality, feel free to venture out and to try additional reports and take a look at the other benefits that your Aloha system can bring to you. Many of these reports are covered additionally in further trainings involving things like advanced reporting, forecasting, and other webinars that we have done. If there's anything we can do to help you configure your reports, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you set up your reports so that they properly reflect the information that your bookkeeper or owner is looking for.